what things that trigger a shift from all that cloud enthusiasm for an on-prem comeback? It's those runaway cloud bills, it's latency issues, security posture, maybe like you brought up an executive mandate or some management mandates of just how their roadmap has changed or shifted. And my previous thoughts going into this is just a lack of planning. You didn't think this through. People bouncing back from the cloud. I'm not totally against it, but I think you just got to be wary of it. Shifting IT, the lift and shift itself is a traumatic experience in IT. And there's a lot of mistakes that can happen that disables the business or creates a wave in the business. And typically IT people can't handle that kind of scrutiny. So, it might be easy for an executive to make a decision, we're going to bring it back to servers. Now, how am I going to do that without everybody screaming at me? So
there's some gotchas. There's some gotchas for sure.
Yeah. Either way you go nowadays, you really need to plan this out and understand it. Luke, welcome to the podcast. Really happy to have you back with us and excited to get into your story and insights again. Today, we'll be covering the flip side of our previous episode, cloud native back to on-prem. So when you hear someone say repatriating, how do you say that, from the cloud in 2026, what does that mean to you? Is it about cost, control, performance, or all of the above?
All of the above. The shortest distinct answer there is all of the above. Some of the example, the big example that sticks for me in what was my team is a group that we were doing work with pulled the plug on their AWS, and they say we're bringing we're spending we're blowing through way too much money. We didn't set up the governance the right way, this, that, and the other thing. Some leadership decisions that a guy was he was really a big fan of DHH and wanted I want to see this thing run on Ruby. I want to see our entire platform run on Ruby on Rails. Instead, they went and picked up and built a Red Hat, and they're gonna host their everything on OpenShift in data centers that they control. That first point there is the cost. They were blowing an exceptional amount of money on their cloud spend on that angle, and then there was still the sovereignty and data concerns was the other justification for it. Something to be said for for Ruby on Rails as a system and design. So those are kind of the big ones that I've heard in decision makers when I go sit in those rooms as a consultant on that one. If I think about it, again, as I think about it in 2026, where I'm building my local AI, and I'm building a brand new box here in my home lab that I'm gonna build a lot of workloads. Got a lot of thought processes, the Jarvis Friday of it all to run that here. I want that here because I'm concerned about what my kids are going to say to it and what happens to that data down the road. So there's that FUD on that angle that gets me there. It also removes my latency, right? If I go yell at my assistant, that's sitting here on my shoulder. If I'm running that system here, now I'm not going to Cupertino. I'm going to the box down underneath my desk. So that gives me that side from that angle. And then I've been at this long enough. I've watched I've had some of these conversations with people that want to bring it back. It's I miss being able to go sit and work in my data center. Sit in there with the din and the noise. And now, because I did this earlier in my career when they moved, I got moved out of an office after grad school and into a cube, and I'd never worked in a pod farm, and I can't focus. So it's now I can go there, and there's to some point there's some nostalgia. It would be the fourth leg of that I would say in terms of cost, latency, data concerns, and sovereignty. From that, there's also just the now I have that, right? I think a little bit, as I look at, again, I'm trying to build a system. I got my CPU in, I scrounged some RAM together. I'm still looking to go, what's my GPU on that one? Now I'm going to have all that. And I get to, like, there's the, oh, cool, I'm back in the 90s and I'm going to build a computer. So there's just some of that comes with this, especially now that we're of the age, or I'm at the age where I get to be like, you could be the shot caller. Let's go have that fun. And now, as I think about it from that angle too, it's also the teaching, right? Now I have, my home lab here, I'm going to be able to teach my kids. I could also with my home lab, now I can go, because I have all of the information of infrastructure as code, proper zero trust, DevOps principles, all of that modern stuff that I've done in Azure and AWS, which was great. Now I get to bring those skills down with a couple little tweaks, and I get to have that in a system where I have data sovereignty, data control. I don't really necessarily need to worry about data exfil or GDPR or any of those things. And my legal team can now guard and do whatever they want with PCI and PII and HIPAA and all of that stuff and PHI. And that conversation gets simplified too from what is my business? I think of the things that I think about it from it.
You touched upon it briefly. I don't know if you had anything more that you wanted to add, but you talked about workloads. And I think about repatriating from the cloud. Would there be specific workloads that you would see coming back on-prem? You talked about AI. I think that was definitely one, AI, machine learning. And then you also mentioned latency as another big consideration. Maybe on-prem AI?
On-prem AI is a big one, right? Still, because it's because you think about the way that is, because it's you run the latency of, if I'm chatting with, let's say I've got hosting or running a VM, and it's hosting my Olama instance, so I'm running DeepSeek on a VM wherever. That's got to go out and go through everybody's firewalls and all that and routing to come back to me on the scale of it's a chat conversation. So there's something to be said for that. All of those hops being, from this box through my switch and back to the server, and in the round trip there being short. The other thing that as you kind of described in paraphrase for me, the other thing that pops in my head is, if I've got all my data here, my analytics, or my training of the model, my fine tuning of the model, that gets done on that throughput and latency that is machine 1 to machine 2 on the same rack. So that, so there's that piece of it with, the amount of data that we're dealing with for anything on a day-to-day basis, right? We're not talking about the kilobytes that we were that we were working with when we all moved. We're talking in terms of gigs. It's I think my day-to-day, we've got a large chunk of our system is, we measure it in gigabytes now, and in the types of, in the high volume and high throughput that we're running. I wonder when much more of us start to go, this makes some sense.
Dollars and cents.
Yeah, literally. Probably not right now, as we're all scrambling and watching data centers get built up all around us. But once that building boom goes.
So I'm going to double down on my question again. I hear about this stuff all the time, and I guess I'm in my old ways. I'm stuck in my thoughts, and maybe there's other options, but what things that trigger a shift from all that cloud enthusiasm for an on-prem comeback? It's those runaway cloud bills, it's latency issues, security posture, maybe like you brought up an executive mandate or some management mandates of just how their roadmap has changed or shifted. And my previous thoughts going into this is just a lack of planning. You didn't think this through. I have to remember, though, if I took myself back to 1999 before, Y2K, if I took myself back to the cloud, I didn't know what I know now. Now I could say that. But back then, you really didn't know a lot of what cloud, you didn't know about ingress and egress and ingress charges, how different they were. You didn't know about some of those pieces, but lack of planning, some of it, but it could have been shift of business, like you were mentioning too. Your business could change. Maybe you bought somebody out. Maybe you got bought out. And now what your data centers are looking like, it's a different, fact of way it is. So I just wanted to I just get stuck on this. People bouncing back from the cloud. I'm not totally against it, but I think you just got to be wary of it. Shifting IT, the lift and shift itself is a traumatic experience in IT. And there's a lot of mistakes that can happen to a bit that disables the business or creates a wave in the business. And typically IT people can't handle that kind of scrutiny. So, it might be easy for an executive to make a decision, oh, we're going to bring it back to servers. Now, how am I going to do that without everybody screaming at me? So I
There's some
think
gotchas. There's some gotchas for sure.
yeah, either way you go nowadays, I mean, you really need to plan this out and understand it. And it's just tough when everyone's in, the enthusiasm's there, but
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, the enthusiasm goes until you run your first your first $1 million OpenAI bill.
yeah,
I don't know that I've heard anybody who's done that. I have heard the good cloud story. The one that I love the most is also the kind of my cautionary tale of not using ClickOps and not all that is. We were working on I was working on a system that it was intended to cut 35%. The goal from leadership on down was cut 35% down of the calls going into the call center. And you're going to do that with a chatbot. This is not a 2026. This is a 2018 conversation. We're going to build a chatbot, and you're going to cut in, and you're going to use that from the main banner website, and you're going to cut 25% of your cost.
mm-hmm.
And the architecture decision that we started as our POT was we're going to go to Cosmos. These were the days when Cosmos was brand new, and your lowest one was costing like $100 a day or something like that. So we sat in the room, we architected, this is the SKU we need, this is the size we need. And I pushed the button and we turned it on and we tested it for like 2 or 3 hours. And then it was hey guys, we're all going to happy hour. Okay, let's go to happy hour. Mexican joint's just around the corner. I came back Monday morning I just unlocked my laptop and there's, I was on the subscription page and I spent $7,000 over the weekend.
Yeah.
Drop of a bucket for what we were working with, and Microsoft waived it on us anyways, I think. But that's that conversation of we immediately pivoted and took that back to we're going to run that down to this tiny Azure SQL that the rest of the DB team, old siloed, traditional siloed has control over, and they know what's going on there. And that's kind of that conversation. It's the sticker shock that goes through of what would drive you to make a massive financial decision that is, we're going to repatriate that. But to your point, Brian, in the interceding years, we've all learned a lot. So we've gotten a lot smarter of how we plan and what we understand and what the capabilities are, and we get to have a better, what is the business reason, and this is the technical solution, and this is what it's going to cost from a CapEx and OpEx perspective to build your AI and train your AI in your own data center.
Yeah, and I think back in the day they didn't. I'm giving vendors the benefit of the doubt, but nowadays I've seen like ServiceNow, I believe, in Zurich with AI, they have like this page where it kind of gives you an idea of if you're doing this, anticipate these costs, and it kind of they're getting up front on it. So you know what you're getting into, so they don't have to credit you. Because they warned you, there's the legal page, right? Sign us, you've seen this page. And I think that's better because we better understand it. Back then, again, hindsight's 2020, maybe Microsoft, and they didn't know exactly how to tell you about egress, the effect of those costs on your app. And you're used to pushing or pulling data all the time, and you just thought that was just something else you can do. Now I can do it from the cloud. That traffic is not going to cost you.
Yeah, I think Microsoft's done a really good job of. I don't think when I do cloud modernization work, when I re-argue between, and AWS has it too. Like everybody's got their well-architected framework, and this is what this looks like, and it's tested and rigored and in all of those places. And I don't propose a workload moving to the cloud that doesn't have
some type of monitoring, or
it's got the cost calculator on it. So this is what your per month is. You're gonna want to talk about talk with the manager of your EA about what your discounts and benefits of all that are. And now in the orgs that I've worked in, the places I've been, there's still, we know the SKUs, we can design the size of the machines that we need. Because even if we're talking about, I'm going to go build a Kubernetes system, I'm going to go build an on-prem Kubernetes with anything or vanilla Kubernetes. I know how to size that machine. I know what that machine from a capital expenditure is going to be. And now we can weigh Here's my Azure cost calculator. Here's my capital expenditure spreadsheet that tells me what it's going to cost to do it here. And then manpower and headcount is the third leg there. Now I know what, now I can have a reasonable decision of, does this particular workload make sense here, there, or down in my data center? And then you get to, and then now you're back to a conversation of latency, resiliency, transport, communication. How are we getting data from A to B to C and have that be valuable to the people that need it?
Yeah.
I think I spend a lot of time with people talking about, and I kind of joke with it in my teams of, let's be hybrid. Let's just let's have our own stuff. But then now you got to account for, this is what my ingress and egress are going to be back and forth, or I'm paying for express route or something along those lines.
That's true. I mean, because egress is your most expensive of the traffic. Mm-hmm. So when you go hybrid, that's where you pay. As long as if you're pulling into the cloud more hybrid, that's fine. But if you're pushing back out to your accounting system, or maybe your CMDB, your asset system is sitting on Prem, oh my God. I mean, you got to be ready for the costs. So
when we think about some of the lessons learned, and I think we mentioned that was a really good example with the workload. I think probably think about where your workload should live is part of that. When we think about aligning to this direction where repatriating makes sense, and business objectives have changed, and this is the direction that we're going, do you have any lessons there on how to communicate this as that strategic course correction instead? I'm trying to think how to phrase this.
Instead of a retreat and a runaway? Yeah,
essentially.
I think the way that I'm communicating it when I kind of talk through this, or the guys that my buddies and colleagues that are really heavy in building AI, what decisions, AI being the big monster of the room, like, what do you want to do with AI? What are your business concerns? Do you have, I think about, my healthcare, I want my doctor to make the best, most informed, fastest decisions possible. Do I now have concerns about where my medical data are going? And would I like my healthcare provider to have the acumen to go, this is how we're handling your data and protecting our data and protecting our systems to avoid all the security ramifications, like the prompt protections, any of those things that come with, and whether you're on prem or in the cloud. Like, this is what you are, and it still comes back to that cost benefit of, to have an equivalent one-for-one system here or there, what's my cost going to be? And I think there's still, when we talk about, building out the cost calculators for any of my hyperscalers, still don't know that I necessarily talk about, what's that cost of your compliance with PHI, with HIPAA and that. I think it's another it's another set of people in the room when those decisions are made, those conversations are made, help that conversation. And I think there's also a PR and a marketing piece about that. How am I keeping you safe? And am I being efficient?
Kind of on that same line of thought, when we think about cutting costs, where do teams go wrong when they think moving back on-prem will instantly cut costs? Like, is it just instant ROI? Boom, we're saving money hand over fist now.
I think about I'm with a cloud native, so we've got no data centers. And as I come in as the rabble rouser and go, well, how do we maybe want to repurpose that IVR system in Milwaukee to do so that we can train these things locally. For some of these firms, some of the startups that have started in AWS, in theory that'd be great. Now I'm not paying $200,000 a month in cloud costs for everything, but you gotta spin up and build and procure that equipment. You gotta get a building. You gotta secure the building. You got time. That goes to Brian. We were just talking about the kids growed up and moved out, and we get to downsize. What's my time to ROI on not paying the electric bill? Not saving the $150 on my electric bill.
Yeah, you either got capital cost, general expense from a lease. You've got to spend. You got to worry about security. You've got now maybe you downsize with your salary and you don't have those engineers you used to have, and now you got to bring them back because now there's more attention that you have to put on it, not some Microsoft analyst in their side, right? Who's watching and maintaining. So
God, Brian,
there's some decisions that you got to make, and they might be the right ones, but you gotta be ready for it.
Yeah, I mean that's the other, like, just like our time back and forth, like we got to restaff. Now I got to go find those people.
Yeah, find that Cobalt engineer.
Yeah, the cloud first COBOL.
Yeah, the profile for a cloud first Kubernetes engineer building an EKS in AWS is really different from the guy that can physically rack your switch.
I think that's my next question is when you bring those cloud era practice, how do you bring those cloud era practices like container orchestration, infrastructure as code, CI/CD, all that? How do you bring that back into the data center? How can you take advantage of moving forward with technologies, but yet you're still you backed up in a sense, in a way. But how do you do that?
I don't think it changes because I think we had so many lessons learned when from when Azure and AWS got big, and and Google released Kubernetes and Borg and all of those things. The things and tools and tricks that we got as we scaled on the cloud, those don't change, right? If I'm building my my local AI, if I'm building my local Jarvis, I don't need that level of scale, but my app, I still need to secure my app. I still need a WAF. I still need a load balancer. I still need I still need virtualization. I still need network segmentation and all of those things. And what I'm doing here locally is I kind of build those stuffs out, and I start building my local fitness apps or whatever side project I've got cooking here. I'm literally looking at my server. I have the same enterprise equipment here that is sitting in a data center in Reston. All of those principles still apply to modern applications and modern architecture. I'm just hooking it onto a box here. Yes, I think that's one of the other things that I've loved as I've made that pivot from running the applications that I've run for years in Azure and running them here locally, which started as this is how you do this from a consulting point, and this is how I would move this back up, to, okay, now how do I actually run this and build this and maintain this as the contributor to that project? I think it's all of the things from GitHub or Azure pipelines or all that stuff translates. You just have to think about it. You don't have a pretty portal for a lot of that time.
Somebody was doing it over here, and now you're doing it over here. Along the same line, what technologies or architectures make on-prem feel cloud native? I think you talked about Kubernetes, some other technologies, but can you make on-prem feel cloud native?
I'm trying to. From my personal experience, I think we use. I think the team that I'm with now, if you think about the old school style, right? If we think about VMs in a data center, we're using. Obviously, we're using Terraform, and I'm mimicking. I use Terraform to manage my infrastructure here, and I've got I'm building my own Kubernetes cluster, so that means I have the VMs or the machines, so I need configuration on that. So I'm still using Ansible to configure that machine. I'm still using an AI as my co-pilot to build that. I'm still using GitHub as my build orchestrator, as my CI/CD. So all of the things, where once upon a time I bang on Jenkins, and I'll continue to bang on Jenkins till the day I die. I built a machine in a data center here in Cincinnati that, in the story there was, and it pushed up a zip file that was the application, and it robocopied from the server in the DMZ out to the application server. It's the same model here. It's still Jenkins, or still GitHub, or still Azure pipelines. It's all the same stuff, and still approaching it from a agile delivery perspective. I mean, my local projects don't run at the speed of an agile project because of reasons, but we still have all of the things we learned in how do I deploy this code from my laptop to that system, whether it's a web app or it's a it's a Kubernetes workload or it's serverless functions, we still have, to, how do I get it to that machine? How do I deploy my code? And it's just changing the target. And in this case, it feels weird to go out to GitHub and come back to a level, but I don't know that anybody wants to go back to building their own and hosting their own source control repositories.
So, I mean, part of what you're describing here is rebuilding that operational muscle. You're doing it there in your own lab. I've kind of got a lab set up and do some of that. But how do you rebuild that muscle, or how do you recommend rebuilding that muscle internally when so much was outsourced to cloud providers, the monitoring, the patching, the scaling? Is it just taking those same apps and figuring out how to make that feel cloud native, or just translate that to on-prem?
We're in our day-to-day, I think we're having the conversation of how are we, we're having the re-architecture conversation in the reverse, right? You talk about, I love to bang on, I've got a mainframe, I've got a COBOL middleware layer. And then I'm running some ancient Java and some ancient Tomcat system that I want to get up. Great. Now I've got some massive, cool, we're writing it in Rust and we're hosting it on ephemeral MongoDB instances or any of those things. And now we want to bring it back because of all the business justifications for that. Okay. Now, what do I need to run a Redis cache? What requirements do I need to have? You're doing the same RPath architecture analysis, because to bring that back, and that's how do I fit that on the equipment we have in the basement, or what do we have to go CapEx to go bring that back in, and what's reasonable from this year, next year's budgets, or what do and how you wave plan that, and how you work through repatriation at that point. To a point, it's the reverse of what we did 10 years ago. But at the same point, it's harmonization, because it's the reverse with lots of lessons learned and lots of new technologies and lots of new things that we did to enable a younger workforce or enable a different workforce or address some of the concerns of build out of the data centers, right? Like you think about it, because I want to build in the cloud. The only data center I had in 2015 was San Francisco or Alexandria, Virginia. But I live in Des Moines.
Road trip.
Because that's a conversation I had with the client with a migration we did was the users here are in Kansas, and we got to this has got to and they're in Kansas on thin bandwidth. And we got to host this in Dallas or Chicago. And my network engineer's in Chicago, so I'm going to lean to that, because he can go like, well, you're not going to get into the Azure data center anyway. But it's all those questions. I have a buddy that is with an insurance agency that they have not, and they will not go because of what they view their latency requirements are going to be to the insurance entities that they work with in Kansas and Iowa and Illinois. I think at one point when I was working with him 10 years ago, he says, yeah, we still got people using dial-up modems to get in there. They know the broadband was in some of those instances with those customers was not a thing. So that covered them.
It feels a lot like you've got a pair of jeans that you just love from the 90s and you wear them every day and they're back in style, but you've got lessons learned. You know better how to wear them and where to wear them.
What about those mesh shirts from the 80s? They're still used in the 80s.
I don't know about that.
All right. So what skills or team structure do you need to change or is critical to be successful and to run a modern on-prem environment? And I think the question after that is, how can listeners avoid turning a repatriation into a morale hit for engineering teams being restructured and how they're doing things who just finished a cloud migration? I mean, for a lot of teams, they just finished this stuff, right? They're just starting to maybe reap the rewards of a cloud or get to know it, get comfortable with it. And now you're taking them back home again, which they probably stood in the stand begging you not to do and fighting you to do anyway, right? So how do you build a team and the skills back again, but in a new way? Like we were talking about, it's a new look. We're not going back to the 80s. It's a new on-prem because we've learned things, we have new tools. And what's your thoughts there?
I think the approach I'd take, Brian, is because it's like that. It really is the new tools drive, right? Because I think the harmonious or the harmony thing that's going to be new for a lot of folks in making that decision, especially small to medium, right, is getting comfortable with mounting and racking your servers and touching the actual metal. I think that's going to be the scariest thing. I think when I started the home lab here and started building that out, it was, oh man, and working through the networking, but there's still some of that historical legacy knowledge, that tribal institutional knowledge that we have that can guide through there as we're working with those teams, the network and the storage team, to get comfortable with the modern deployment mechanisms to how we get code into the cloud in the first place. Well, now it's the same. It's the same techniques, same ways of working that you're just going to do it again back here. The scary bit is going to be, I think the scary bit is building and racking and in the physical security and the physical power and in the real estate of the capital expenditures where we've all burned that muscle. Like we've not flexed those abilities of understanding dirt and in the role that dirt and power and all that plays in our compute for long enough. We've been spoiled that I push a button and it goes to Azure, it goes to AWS, or it goes to GCP, and cool. Now I gotta go. The story happened to me. The one that happened to me the other day is I was sitting on a call and the power went out, which took my switch down. It took my router down. And it's, oh yeah, now we got to have power backup. So we got to remember those things, that it's the little things that we knew that there's banks and banks and banks of generators sitting outside those data centers to keep them running, and all those UPSs, but we just got to rebuild those. I think for me, that's the scariest piece, is that the compute, the ones and zeros, the application code, whether it's going to be, whether it was COBOL or Fortran or Rust or Go now, it's all compile time. We push up binaries, to the thing, and the machine eats it and brings us pretty pictures and live webcams and and the ability to work remote across time zones. But just the idea of the physics is the scariest thing for a lot of people that I would be talking with.
For a leader considering moving back to on-prem, what might be the first questions they should ask before committing to a move? Before they go through this whole journey, this whole path, what should they ask first? Or maybe consider?
I think that it's what are my customers? What are my users? What are my clients? What's their experience going to be? Mm-hmm. That's my first question, is because we all have to stay in business, right? We've got to, we're in the business to do whatever. What's the experience of one of the other, what's going to be the experience of my team that's going to be managing that hydroponic system? That grow for whatever we want to grow down in our greenhouse. What's their experience going to be like in somebody else's cloud or on mine? I think the second question that I ask there is, and you guys asked it, how does my team change? What does my team need in order for that to be successful? Wherever it is. And then the third question gets down to how. I think if I were the leader, I think those would be the three questions in the order that I would be asking.
Yeah, because the how is dependent on the first two, right? Mm-hmm. You always take that in consideration because you got to live with it, right? So you're moving houses, but you got to live with that choice. It's too expensive of a move, too much loss of time and efforts to say, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it again. You can't do that.
Yeah, well, and then there's the moving team. Right? Who's gonna pack it up? Who's gonna move it? How it's gonna get moved? Turning the lights on and getting power and water run to the house when you make that decision to make that move.
Yeah, can the jet go into the pit or area for service for a while, or does it have to keep flying and you're changing the engine while in flight?
Yep.
It's those questions.
You mean it doesn't rack itself?
People think, hey,
GitHub doesn't magically push it. The GitHub Copilot that fixes your PRs and and commits your PRs and runs the build doesn't
Control Alt install rack.
It's sad. There's a lot of IT guys believe. I mean, if you look at some of the newer guys who have learned this stuff from a book, sort of a thing, and no practice yet, they don't know how some of the stuff is built, and what the effort. Oh, just change it. No, hold on. Look at this bridge and all this weathering we have to do to get there. So.
Mm-hmm. My own journey. I was in my office here and my home lab are in my construction site. Literally, I live in a construction site and work through a remodel as my family grows. And I finished the major dusty part of my build, popped the top of my server, and went, I should put more RAM in that. And while I'm looking at it, and I've got the sticks in my hand, I'm like, I should blow this out before I install this new RAM. It's okay to blow it out. I turned it off. I shut it down. I safely shut the thing down. The static discharge blew up the motherboard.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's
you just Control Z, install a new motherboard, switch it over, and then you're back in business, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a Control Z on that one.
Yeah.
Undo that.
I was so glad for Control Z. Whoever thought that one up, genius. So I think I'll close this out here. Thanks to everyone for watching our episode today. Big shout out to Luke for cutting through the hype and showing that cloud native and on-prem aren't enemies, they're tools. You can mix to the right outcome for your apps, your data, and your budget. If you dug this episode, hit follow, leave a quick rating, and send it to a fellow architect or IT leader who's stuck in the all cloud or nothing mindset. This is the Wired Garage with Pops, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.
Cheers.